Whether you know it or not, you are an influencer. Whether you know it or not, every conversation, every interaction, every post, share, snap, and tweet is pointing someone to something. In your words, attitudes, actions, what do people think about when they think about you? What image are you projecting? What brand are you pushing? What kind of platform are you building? Because whether you know it or not, you do have a platform. So ask yourself, how are you going to use it?
Hey, Grace, welcome. My name is Jason, and I'm the campus pastor at our Upper Arlington campus. I'm so glad that you're joining us this weekend. It's likely that I am a new face to you, as I've only been on this team for a few short months. And I know that this 2020, this pandemic year, it has been crazy for all of us, but 2020 has been especially busy for my family, for my wife and I. We had a new baby boy who was born in July, and we're excited about that. And so that is our third. We have a boy, a girl, and then now another little baby boy. And then we made a big move across the country, all the way from Dallas to Columbus here in August. And so far, we are loving Columbus, loving Grace, and especially loving being at the Upper Arlington campus. My hope is that your Thanksgiving was a good time, and it was full of turkey and football and way too many carbs, and also that hopefully you had the chance to rest a little bit, as well as take some time to just be thankful. So hopefully you had a great Thanksgiving. This week, we're finishing up this series that we've been calling Platform. And what this series has been all about is it's been about the influence that you have in the lives of those around you. In fact, one of the things we've been saying throughout the series is that what a platform does is it elevates what is already there. One of the things that a platform does is it just elevates what already exists, what is already there. And so the idea is you becoming a dad, it doesn't make you like a nice person or a grumpy person. All it did was it elevated what you already were. Your friendships, they don't make you more caring or more loving. It just kind of elevates and displays what is already there. And in this conversation, we've been talking about these different platforms that you have and how you have these smaller platforms, and then together they build your overall platform, or they build your overall influence. And so we've been talking about how you have influence with your friends, you have influence with your family, you have influence with those around you. And one of the things as we've been going through this series, it's been good. It's been powerful. It's been a great reminder to be intentional. And my hope is that you've been challenged throughout the series. But one of the things that I've felt, and you may have felt as well, that it's also been a little bit overwhelming. Like we're in this place where now there's all these people who are supposed to influence, and whether it's those on social media, whether it's like your high school gym teacher or your friends or your neighbors, now we're almost more aware of all these people that we're supposed to influence. And so I was sitting there a couple weeks ago thinking, man, like, am I now supposed to influence like my kid's soccer coach? Like now do I have to influence like my high school biology teacher? Is that a responsibility I have? And so one of the things I wanted to do is we begin the final conversation as we talk about influence and we talk about platforms is this. Let you know that the reality is that we actually have a limited amount of influence. That you don't have unlimited amount of influence. And the reality is that all of us, we would love to make the biggest difference in the world. We would love to see the world completely transformed, and if there's an injustice that you've seen, if there's something you felt, we would love to make the biggest difference. We would love to influence everyone that we ever meet, every person we ever shake their hand. Like we would love to influence them. But the reality is that we actually have a limited amount of influence. Now, part of that, there's a positive side to that and a negative side. Although you can't influence everyone, you're not going to influence the entire world, you actually do have a tremendous amount of influence in the lives of some people. For instance, I probably wouldn't have to work really hard to convince you that if you're married, you have a great amount of influence over your spouse. If you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, like you have significant amounts of influence in their life. If you have kids, you influence them. If you have parents, then you have a big amount of influence in the lives of your family. And similarly, I probably wouldn't have to try really hard to convince you that you have a lot of influence over your friends. Right, over those that are your best friends, those that are texting you regularly, those that you're going on trips with, you have a lot of influence over your friends. And there's this third group of people that we're going to talk about today that you actually have the opportunity to influence, and that is those that you work with. I had this coworker in high school, and his name was Tom. Tom was in his 40s. And Tom was one of those guys who was like the biggest grump in the world. You know, like no matter how, like it could be rainbows and sunshine outside, and he was just having the worst day. He was the biggest grump. You guys, I'm sure, have friends or know people like that. And that is until kind of you got on Tom's good side. And then really he had this heart of gold. You just kind of had to dig for it. Tom, he had 2 cats, and he treated them like they were his kids, which I thought was ridiculous then. And I still think it's ridiculous. Like, it's just, come on, people, please. Tom, he loves sci-fi movies. And in fact, he had this one favorite sci-fi movie that he would talk about all the time. And in fact, he talked about it so much that he convinced me, I'm going to date myself, but he convinced me to go to Blockbuster and to rent this movie. And I rented it, and it became one of my all-time favorite movies. I had another coworker later on, a different job, a different place, and her name was Candace. Candace was a lady in her early 20s, and Candace, she had just a tremendous amount of ambition. Like if you told me today that Candace was leading a company, leading an organization, leading a division, owned her own business, like I would not be surprised at all. An interesting thing about Candace is that if her ambition was like up here or 100, then her boyfriend's ambition was like -0. And so I'm curious what happened with that relationship sometime. Candace, she also loved those gossip magazines, and she was always talking about, you know, who the it celebrity was and who they were dating this week. And you might be thinking, why are you telling me this? Like, I certainly don't know about Tom. I don't know Candace. I definitely don't care about them. And that's completely true. The reality is that you've never met them, but I knew him. I knew Tom. And I knew Candace, and the reality is that they had influence in my life, and I had influence in their lives. And although you don't know Tom and you don't know Candace, you know people like them. You have a Tom, you have a Candace in your life, in your relationship, and in this world that we live where we have a limited amount of influence, there's this other group of people that we do have influence over. It's those that we spend 40 hours a week with. It's those that you go to school with. It's those that you work with. It's those that you're on the PTA board with. In fact, you're actually going to spend, if you have a full-time job, 1,800 hours with your coworkers every single year. If you're a student, the math looks different. If you're on one of the boards or whatever, the math looks different, but you get the idea. Right? You spend a tremendous amount of time with these people, and in this world where we have limited influence, there's one group of people where we do have a tremendous opportunity to influence, and it's those we work with. Now, you might be asking, okay, how do we do that then? Like, how do we influence these people? Like, what should this look like? And so I want to play a quick game for you guys because there's something that we need to realize if we're going to live this out. And so I'm going to give you guys some different companies and some different organizations, and I want you to think or to talk with the person next to you or maybe write down on your phone or whatever what you think that these companies have in common. Okay, got it? All right, what do these companies have in common? Here they are. Sleep apnea masks, Enlightened diet strips, Zales jewelry store, the Tiger Woods golf game, Taco Bell, Gold Bond, and Chris Christie. You got it? Does everyone know? Right? It's obvious, right? I'm sure we all know, right? All of those companies, at one point in time, they thought, hey, you know what? The best person to sell our product is Shaquille O'Neal. Like who could be better? Shaquille O'Neal. He's the guy. Why? Because he's big, because he's funny, because people love him, and apparently people want to buy, or I guess in the case of Chris Christie, they want to vote for, like whatever Shaq is selling. And the reality is if we want to influence people, we have to learn this truth. And it's this, that you actually have to be liked before you're listened to. In this world that we live where we have limited influence, we need to embrace this idea that you actually have to be liked before you're listened to. You have to be liked before you listen, before you influence others. This isn't just like something that you learn from culture and something we can learn from Shaquille O'Neal, which there's so much we can learn from him. But this is actually a scriptural idea. In fact, Proverbs 24:12, it says this. It says, man, he looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord, he looks at the heart. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord, he looks at the heart. There's a couple things that this verse means. And the first one is and a lot of people I just felt a great amount of like contentment from this and peace, is that God is looking at your heart. And that's true. He is. He's not judging your outside or what you look like or what you've accomplished. Like God is judging your heart, and that should give you peace. But there's another part of that verse is also true. It's that man is looking at the outside, is that actually people's perception of you, it matters. And if you want to influence people, if you want to affect those around you, if you want to push people to a better place, then we have to embrace this principle that you have to be liked before you're listened to. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, honestly, I just go to work and I clock in and I clock out. Like, that's why I'm there. I'm a student because I have to be, because my parents are making me. I'm just there to get that diploma, to get that degree, and that's the only reason why I'm there. You might be thinking, Jason, like, I'm 5 years from retirement. Like, I'm not looking to rock the boat. In fact, I don't care to influence others. I don't really care to be liked. I'm okay with the friendships I have. I let work be work and let my life be my life. And I want to press into that just for a moment. The reality is, if you're a follower of Jesus or if you're not a follower of Jesus, all of us at the very basics, or at the very baseline, we should be able to agree that we should want those who are around us, those we spend time with, to be better because they knew us. Like, we should all agree for that. We should think bigger than ourselves. We should think more outside of ourselves than to just live this self-centered life. We should want those who we spend time with to be better because they knew us. Or maybe you're a leader. Maybe you're a manager. Maybe you already have a leadership position. Maybe you aspire to leadership. And for you, maybe you've heard the quote that all leadership is influence. And so if you want to be a leader, then this is important because you cannot lead without influence, or you can't lead very long, or you can't lead very well, because all leadership is influence. And if you're a follower of Jesus, then actually what you believe is that you have the greatest message that has ever been told. And in fact, if people begin a relationship with Jesus, then their life will be completely different. Everything will be changed. And so for you, influence is vital. Influence is important. And one of the ways in this world that we live in where we have a limited amount of influence, one of the ways we have that is through work. There's one passage in the New Testament that talks about this in great detail and gives us some really practical tips, and that's found in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 to 12. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 to 12. Go ahead, turn on or turn to in your Bibles or on your phone or your device. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 9 to 12. A tiny bit of backstory as we get in. Paul he's the writer. He's writing this letter to the church in Thessalonica, which was just in Rome, and it was in the Roman provinces. And Paul, to begin this chapter in verse 4, and you can read it in verse 1, he says, these instructions were given in order that you would live a life pleasing to God. So that's kind of baseline. Hey, all of this stuff that I'm about to say, it's in order that you would live a life pleasing to God. And so the section that we're going to be in is on work. And so Paul's saying, in your work life, if you want to honor God and live a life pleasing to God when it comes to work, when it comes to school, when it comes to that area of your life, here's how you do it. And we're going to start in verse 9. Here's what he says. Now, about your love for one another, we do not need to write to you. In other words, hey, like you already know all these things. You're in fact, when it comes to love, you're doing a great job. Let's continue on in this verse. For you yourselves, you have been taught by God to love each other. And so, in other words, what Paul is saying here is saying, first of all, this isn't a new teaching, what I'm about to say. But second of all, like, you guys are already doing this. And you're doing an awesome job. You see, so many times in Paul's letters, he was writing to a church, and it was pretty negative. And it was like, hey, you guys, like you keep doing this thing. Can you stop that? Like, no, don't listen to that guy or don't do that thing or here's this sin that you're embracing that you need to stop embracing. So many times Paul's letters are like that, but this one's different. This one, Paul is writing to this church and he's saying, you're doing awesome. Like this is the opposite of the finger wag. This is like, you guys are doing great. Keep it up. Like, I'm so proud. I'm so happy. You're doing an awesome job when it comes to loving each other. And then he continues on. And he says, in fact, you do love all of God's family throughout Macedonia. And so he goes on and says, hey, not just as you think about loving each other, you're not just loving each other in this really good, in this really powerful way, but you're actually going outside of the church walls, if you will, and you're loving those in your community. And so once again, Paul is saying, like, you're doing an amazing job, and I can't help but think of our church. And even though I've only been here a few short months, this is what I see. I would say as a church, like we're trying to do a good job as I meet people and talk with them and watch what grace groups do and watch our community and watch how people have responded in the pandemic. I would say this is like we have a lot in common with this church. Like you're doing a great job. In fact, my guess is that most people who go to Grace, who are listening to this, who are watching this, are thinking, hey, I want to live my life in order to please God. I think we have so much in common with this church. And even when Paul says, hey, outside of these walls, you're doing an amazing job. I think of 2 weeks ago, our church through Dollar Club gave almost $8,000 so that families who weren't going to experience Christmas could experience Christmas. I think Paul would say, hey, you're doing an awesome job. And he continues on. He says, yet, we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more. I recognize that some people, you've heard a message on work. And in fact, we're in week 3 where we've been talking about influence. And so it might be your disposition to think, hey, Jason, I'm doing it. Like I listened to Keith's messages and they were good and they were challenging. And in fact, I've been trying to apply those things into my life and I want to influence those around me. Or maybe like I'm already trying to do an excellent job at work and I've heard so many messages on work and how we do that as a Christian, but like I got it, I'm doing it. And Paul, when he was talking to this church, he was talking to people just like you who were saying, hey, I'm trying my best. And in fact, he was saying, hey, you are succeeding. You're doing a great job. But he doesn't end there. He says, can you do so? Go back. Can you do so? More and more. And so I'd ask you, if that's you, if you already feel like you're trying, if you already feel like you're working for it and working towards it and trying to apply these truths, then I want to say the same thing that Paul says. Hey, can you lean in for the rest of this message? Can you open your ears, even though you're trying, even though you're doing a great job? Can you do so just a little bit more? Just a little bit more? And Paul, he continues on in verse 11 and verse 12. This is really the meat as we get into practically how to live out this idea of work. And here's what Paul says. He says, and make it your ambition. You guys, in American culture, we love ambition. Like ambition is our favorite thing. In fact, I don't think the American dream, it exists without the word ambition. This is how we live our lives. We want the corner office. We want the big pay raise. We want the car that's not made in America, but that's made in Germany, right? Like we want title. We want status. We want to have big ambition because you are what your title is so many times in our culture. In fact, I read a tweet this week from Elon Musk. And you guys, the fact that I can say Elon Musk, and you all know who I'm talking about, proves this. Right? Like we all know he's the rocket ship guy. He's the electric car guy. And what Elon Musk said, he was responding to an article written about him where he required some of his workers to work 80 to 100 hours a week, which is a lot if you're unfamiliar with that. And what he said was, hey, no one changed the world on 40 hours a week. Like that is only something that can be taught and embraced and accepted in this culture that loves ambition, that says, hey, what is your 5-year plan? Well, what have you done for me lately? We want to climb the corporate ladder. And Paul says, make it your ambition too, to lead a quiet life. What? To lead a quiet life? Wait, no, but like being a follower of Jesus and things were going to start clicking for me and I was going to get that title and I was going to move to that position. And Paul says, make it your ambition not to achieve this great thing, but to lead a quiet life. And let's continue reading. You should work, you should mind your own business, and you should work with your hands just as we told you. In that culture, you guys, working with your hands was something that slaves did. It was something that the poorest of the poor did. And so what Paul is saying here is incredibly countercultural. It is just like, that is crazy. And in a different way, this is so countercultural for you and I, because Paul is saying you should have ambition, but it should be more in the lines of faithfulness. It should be more in the lines of getting out of the spotlight, not trying to put yourself in the spotlight. Verse 12 continues on. Here's what it says. So that. In other words, what Paul has said so far is, hey, everything that I've said, there's a reason for it. Or there's a purpose for what I've been saying, and that's why he has so that, and then he continues. And the purpose behind what we've been talking about is this, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anyways. In other words, the reason why you should have this ambition to lead a quiet life is so that you may win the respect, so that you may win influence. In fact, one of the things that I think that this verse is saying is what we talked about earlier, that you actually have to be liked before you're listened to. Paul is just affirming that idea in that your work should lead to other people respecting you. And who? Who should be respecting you? It says right here, outsiders. In other words, Paul is saying those that aren't in your group, those that don't agree with you, those that sit on the other aisle politically, those that disagree or that don't like your team or aren't on your side, those that are not followers of Jesus even, so that your work life would win their respect. One of the things that I think that this passage is teaching overall is this, and this is how we wrote it in your notes, that your work is actually building your witness. That one of the purposes of your work, it's not just to create things, it's not just to make sales. It's not just to treat patients. But one of the purposes of your work is this, that your work is actually building your witness. In fact, I think what Paul is saying here overall is that we should work in such a way that we would win the respect of others. In fact, this word witness, what I mean by that is that your work, it is building your ability to tell others about Jesus. And Paul would say our work should be done in such a way that we win the respect, that it changes how people look at you and how people look at your God. Whenever I went to college, I went to a Bible college, and that was part of my path to becoming a pastor. You don't have to do that to become a pastor. There's lots of routes, but that's one of the things that I did is I went to a Bible college. And there are a few different companies that love to hire students from my college. And I worked for a few different of these companies. One was a valet company, so parking some really nice cars. And another one was a catering company, so going to swanky parties and serving people, obviously, at those parties. And I remember I had a boss who said, hey, I love to hire Bible college students because they don't drink our booze and they don't steal the money. And that's what Paul's talking about. He's saying, hey, like your work should be done in such a way that even if they're not Christians, they should want to hire Christians. And even if they're not a Christian, they should want their babysitter to be a Christian. And even if they're not a Christian, they should actually want their mechanic to be a Christian, or they should want their used car salesman to be a Christian, that your work is actually building your respect and ability to tell others about Jesus. And that is what Paul is writing in this passage. So how do we do that? Like, how do we live that out? You might be thinking, Jason, like, are you asking me right now that every Monday morning I need to send John 3:16, like company-wide emails? Is that what we're doing? Like, when do I share my faith and invite people to Jesus or into a relationship with Jesus? Is that before the sales call or at the beginning of the sales call or the end of the sales call? Like, what does that look like? And it's probably none of those things, but there's a very clear way, there's three really clear ways in this passage that it talks about how we can live this out, how we can live in such a way that our work is building our witness. And here's how we wrote the first one in your notes. that your platform, it is actually built by pursuing faithfulness and not a title. That your platform, your influence, it is built by pursuing faithfulness and not a title. When Paul writes in verse 11 that we need to live a quiet life, that it should be our ambition to lead a quiet life, and he goes on and describes working with your hands, he's not saying strictly that like everyone here needs to go be a plumber. Like that's the practical outworking. Like you need to be a plumber. That's not what Paul is saying, but really he's saying that, hey, this shouldn't be about you. This shouldn't be about you being in the spotlight, you being the center of attention, but actually your faithfulness, your ability to do work should point other people to have respect for you so that you are listened, so that you have influence. It's not about building your own spotlight. One of the things that I've noticed about live television is that it makes everyone feel like they're the center of the world. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, whether it's like Good Morning America when they pan to the audience and everyone is so pumped to be on national TV. In fact, I think the biggest example of this, though, is when they have like the reporter on the street. You know, when he or she is on the street. In fact, I saw this happen just the other day, and it was for Black Friday. They had a reporter on the street, on High Street in Columbus, and there weren't many people around because obviously pandemic and all that. But everyone, whenever they get on camera on live television, they do the same thing. First, they're always in the background, right? Because you're not going to walk in front, but they're always in the background, and they always do the same thing. They look at first, and they notice they're on TV. And then they do one of those like, is this right? Is anyone else around? Is it just me? And then everyone, they do the same thing. They go, hey, look at me. And it doesn't matter if you were a 5-year-old or if you're the leading surgeon in the world, you're going to do the same thing. Like, hey, look at me. There is something built within us where we want to be the center of attention, where we want to be recognized, where we want to be the man or the woman in charge. And what Paul is saying is that actually we should live in such a way that our faithfulness is highlighted. And it's my fear that when it comes to our work, that some of us, like we're only willing to do the extra work if we know that we're going to get the credit. Or we're only going to be a part of that group project if our professor is on the email thread. Or we're never going to sign up for that extra thing because like we just want to be the guy in charge. Or in my guess, a lot of us have done this. Like we're always thinking about and talking and scheming how we can get that next promotion. In fact, some of us have even been friends with someone that we didn't really like, all in the hopes that we could ride their coattails to the top. And Paul says, hey, your work should look different. If you're a follower of Jesus, if you want to live a life that is pleasing to God, your life should look different. In fact, you should pursue faithfulness and not a title. And that's the greatest way to build your platform. I want to recognize right now that some of you already have a title. Some of you already have the corner office. Some of you have already arrived into that place. And in fact, one of the things I'm encouraging in this verse, I think Paul is encouraging, is that you should pursue faithfulness. And what happens when you pursue faithfulness is you become excellent at your job. And you should become excellent at what you do. And sometimes when you become excellent at what you do, then guess what? You get a bigger title. But what Paul is saying, he's not saying, hey, you can't have the title. Hey, you shouldn't have that. And if you have it, actually quit your job and go do something else. Paul is not saying that. What he's saying is it matters what your ambition is. Or the way that we put it in your notes, what are you pursuing? Are you pursuing the title? Is your ambition to have the title? Or is it faithfulness? And Paul is saying in this world that we live in where we have limited amount of influence, one of the ways that you can gain influence as a Christian is to pursue faithfulness and not a title. And so that's the first way. And here's the second way that you can do this. Is we can recognize that your patterns will make or break your platform. When it comes to your influence with others, your patterns will make or break your platform. Verse 12, it says, so that your daily life, what you do every single day, how you interact with people, so that your daily life will win the respect of outsiders. So often we think that the home run swings in life, that's what influences people. Well, okay, I did that big thing, and now everyone's going to love me, but that's actually not how it works. I had a friend in college, and she was an excellent student. She was a really good student. She was one of those people, and you know who they are, that sit in the front row every single class, and then they raise their hand, and they ask 10 million questions, and after class, they go up, and she would always talk to the professor. She obviously never missed a class, that sort of thing. You know who I'm talking about, right? Nerds, teacher pets, right? Successful people, whatever you want to call them, like that's who she was. And so she obviously had a perfect grade going into finals week. And in this class, her final was worth about 30% of her total grade. And she goes in, she's obviously studied a ton, she's ready to go. And for whatever happens, this class was on the last day of finals, it was on a Thursday. And for whatever reason, she missed her alarm. Her alarm didn't go off. She didn't wake up, and those of you who are not too far out of school, you remember that dread, right? Just, oh. And so she freaked out, and she rushed to class, and she got there right as the final was ending, right? There was like a minute left. And she went to talk to her professor, and she explained what happened. And she goes, hey, like, can I take the final? Can I take the exam? And he said, no. Like, I'm sorry, you can't. In fact, this is the last thing, and I'm flying out in an hour. There's nothing we can do. And he goes, but you know what? Don't worry about it. You'll be all right. And she didn't quite understand what was going on, and she's still in that frantic, fearful phase. And so she goes, well, I mean, can I do extra credit? What can I do? Can I write a 5-page paper? Can I write a 10-page paper? That would be even better. And he goes, you know what? You're going to be all right. Yeah, it'll be okay. And you can probably guess what happened. She didn't get an F in the class, even though the final was worth 30% of her grade. She didn't get a D or even a C. She got an A, and not just an A, but she got an A+. Why? Because the professor respected her. Because the professor knew what type of student she was. She had built up these patterns. She had built up, really, this professor had respect for who she was as a student, and he knew who she was. And it's the same way if you want to have influence over those around you. You don't win influence, you don't build your platform by the home run swing. Like you bringing donuts once every 6 months does not make everyone love you. If you give a bonus at Christmas time, well, like that's not what builds influence in the lives of your employees or your friends. In fact, your influence is actually built more like how you respond or act at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. Like that's how your influence is built. If you have roommates and you never do the dishes when it's your turn, like that's how influence is either made or broken. And my fear or my thought is that so many of us, we think that it's just these big things that build influence, when really are we the person who no matter what our boss does, like we're just frustrated. And just behind their back, we're gonna talk bad about them. Are we the employee that's always encouraging, or everything is hard, and we know whenever people come to us, it's a challenge, right? Because our patterns are actually built in the day-to-day, into how you interact on a Thursday afternoon when you need coffee or a nap. Like that's how influence is made. Do people trust you? Do your patterns display that you can be respected, that you can be trusted? Because if you want your work to build your witness, one of the ways that you need to do that is to recognize that our patterns make or break our platform. And here's the last way. Here's the last way we can do this. We need to recognize that our platform, that it has an eternal purpose. We need to recognize that our platform, that it has an eternal purpose. The last verse 12 says, so that you may win the respect of outsiders. There's a purpose for why you work. Shortly after I got married, my wife and I, we moved overseas and we moved to Asia. And we taught English at a university over there, and we worked for the government as well as a university. And I think we were good at our jobs, like all those things that we just talked about. We liked it, we cared about it, we tried to teach well these different subjects that we were tasked with teaching, and all of that was good. But we also realized that we had a bigger purpose for while we were over there. In fact, one of the reasons why we went, the main reason why we went over there was to tell people about Jesus. And so we wanted to have as many big group Bible studies as we could, and we wanted to have as many one-on-one conversations as we could, and we did those things. But the reality is it was easy for us to see that. It was easy for us to see that our work had an eternal purpose because we had traveled so far. In fact, there's something about like stepping onto an airplane and flying to the other side of the world where it was easy for us to see that our purpose was bigger than our occupation. It was just easy to see that. And yet it was no more true for us that our purpose was bigger than our occupation than it is for you when you step in your car and you drive 5 minutes down the road. Like your purpose is still bigger than that degree that you're getting. Your purpose is still bigger than working at that bank. In fact, although I would say our checks were written from that university or from that government, we recognized that we weren't working for them. Like we were working for God. And in the same way for you, you don't work for that bank. Like you work for God. You don't work for that hospital. You don't work for that sales company. Like you have a bigger purpose into what you are doing. Your job, it has not just a small purpose, but it has an eternal purpose. I think some of us in our jobs, it's been hard to even see a purpose. In fact, some of us are probably like, I don't like this. Like I don't like what I'm doing. I'm actively looking. In fact, school, like I don't like these classes this semester. I don't even know why I'm doing this. You have a bigger purpose to what you're doing. It's not just the day-to-day. Others of you, your purpose behind what you do is that you're hoping to retire early. You're hoping one day to put the down payment on the house. You're hoping to have the nicer car. You're hoping to send your kids to that private school. And I would just say, your work, it has a bigger purpose than that. Your work, it doesn't just have those purposes which are good, but your work has an eternal purpose. So those are the ways that our work can be building our witness. So here's our action step for today. Here's the thing that I think all of us can do. All of us, I think, fall within one of these camps. There's 3 different camps, and all of us, we fall within one of these camps, and here's what they are. When it comes to our platform, we either need to build it, we need to overcome it, or we need to capitalize on it. Some of us, we're just building our platform. For instance, for me, I'm in the build it category. We just moved here a few short months ago. I don't have influence with my coworkers. Right? I don't know them super well. In fact, because of this crazy pandemic, you guys, there are coworkers that I work with that I've never seen their face. Right? That's weird. And so I don't have a platform with them. There's coworkers that I work with that we have never been in the same room. And so when it comes to influencing people, I haven't had the opportunity to have these patterns. I haven't had the opportunity to display faithfulness. And so for me, I need to build a platform. If I want to influence others, I need to build a platform. For you, if you're new in your school, if your kids are new to that school, if you have new people on your team, you might be in a place where you say, hey, I want to influence people. But I actually have to build my platform. I have to recognize that I have to be liked before I'm listened to. And so you might need to build it. Others of us, we need to overcome our platform. And some of us need to have just a really honest conversation with ourselves. To say, hey, have my patterns been something where people don't respect me? Where people don't trust me when it comes to faithfulness? Like, am I known as the guy or the girl at work that's going to not be a team player? Am I known as the person that always makes fish in the microwave? It's gross. Stop it. Got to be liked before you listen to. Some of us have a real and genuine platform that we need to overcome. And we're known as that discouraging coworker, that person that no matter what, there is going to be a problem when they go to you. You need to be honest. You need to realize that. And if you want to influence people, you actually have to overcome it. And then lastly, and I think that this is probably the biggest group of us today, many of you have a platform and you need to capitalize on it. And in fact, in this world where we have a limited amount of influence, you've done all the right things. You are liked and therefore you can be listened to. You have your patterns have been awesome and so you're respected. You've been really faithful and you've done everything right. Just like when Paul was writing this church in Thessalonica, Paul would say like, hey, you're doing it. You've done a great job. And I would say for you, if you've done all of those things, then now is the time to capitalize on it. You've done it. You've done the hard work. You have the influence. You have the platform. Now capitalize on it. And hear me out. Like, please do not be at that company for 7 years or for 15 years and have the respect of those around you and never have a conversation about Jesus. Never talk to them about your spiritual life. Please don't do it. Because you've done the hard work. You have the platform. You have the influence. Like, don't be roommates with that guy or roommates with that girl for 3 years and be their friend, maybe be their best friend, and never invite them to church. Because you've done the hard work. And now it's the time, ultimately, to capitalize on it. As we begin the end of this conversation, this idea of platforms, as we end this conversation with about influence, I wanted to just say there's a bigger reason, there's a bigger purpose. I wanted to point us to the bigger purpose of why we're having this conversation. And here's what it is, that your platform, it exists to elevate Jesus. That's what it's there for. And if you're a non-believer, then your influence can be for lots of things and hopefully for good things. But if you're a follower of Jesus, then your platform, it exists to elevate Jesus. As I think about my coworker Tom and my coworker Candace, the reality is if they never knew me, like, their lives would be fine. In fact, there are literally billions of people that will never meet me, that will never meet you, and their lives will be just fine. But if you're a follower of Jesus, then you believe that if they meet Jesus, that their life will be forever transformed, that it will look different forever, and that they will know God. And so, just as Paul said to this church in Thessalonica, hey, you're doing a great job. Like, you're doing it. You're trying, you're pushing, you want to influence people. But then Paul would say, hey, can you do it a little bit more? I'd say the same thing. Hey, you're trying, you're doing an awesome job. Let this be an encouragement to you. But can you do it just a little bit more? Because your platform, it exists to elevate Jesus. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, God, you're good. And I thank you just that you work through people, that you have decided that the way that you are going to work this plan of redemption, this plan of salvation out throughout the world isn't just through your Son, isn't just through some created beings like angels, God, but you want to use people. You want to use our influence. You want to use imperfect people who are sinful, who have problems, who have messed up, God, and you want to use us to bring your message to people. God, we thank you for that. We thank you for the opportunity to be a part of your mission. God, you're so good. I pray just that we collectively, as a church, that we would step into that passage when Paul says, hey, you're doing a great job, but can you do it just a little bit more? God, we thank you that our platforms and our lives, they exist to point to the one true King, and that is you, and that is your Son, Jesus. We pray all these things in your Son's name.